Yeah, we're live. You can get started on.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to another interesting session of Dialogues with Books. As we are aware, the theme for today is History and Chronicles. A very broad theme which has no no ends on both sides. But we'll see what are the things that we can discuss today on this. And obviously, like many other themes, it's not a theme that's going to, be completely or comprehensively covered entirely in a 2 hour session. So it's a start, and then I'm sure all of us are going to leave with a lot of suggestions, a lot of recommendations, and the usual feeling that there's so much to be read that we are never going to finish it. Like, I think that's the feeling with which I leave most or almost every dialogue session. That I come prepared with a few books and then I feel, oh God, there's so much more that I have the iceberg. So, yeah, so hopefully to another session like that. And I see a few new names also today, which feels good, and some of the regular ones. So, for those of you who are new here, folks, Dialogues with Books is something that has been going on for almost 3 odd years now, and most of us have been a part. Many of us here have been a part of it for more than 2 years, and we meet every second Sunday of the month, where we have a pre-planned theme on which all of us read books and then kind of, you know, get those books and talk about them in the session, right? So that's the history of dialogues with books. So Alay, Mandar, Aditi, Akhilesh, you guys want to add anything? The existing dialogues family would like to add anything to this? You're most welcome. Right. If not, we can start with a quick round of introductions very fast. And what I would like, the teacher that I am, I can't stop asking questions. So as we introduce ourselves, I want you to say your name, and then I want you to say, um, just
Your
to
roll
set
number.
the mood or context for today's session, I want you to say which character in history, okay, maybe recent history or past history, which character in history do you identify with or wish you could have been, or wish you could have spent time with, so one character in history that's your uh, idol is a very cliched word, but that's someone you identify with, someone whom you would have loved to either be yourself or you would have loved to spend time with. So, yes, I think we can start. And who would like to go first? We can start with Kanika. Are you there, Kanika? Let's start with Kanika. She's been back after a long time. Kanika?
No, we can't
Um,
hear you, okay?
uh,
Some issue. All right.
some issue. Okay. Vaidehi? Shall we start with Vaidehi? Vaidehi is
Yes,
also back after a long time.
yes. So I'm Vaidehi. So I haven't read much on today's theme as far as books, uh, as if you're talking about books as such. And I'll need a little more time to think about the historian that I want to identify with. I was thinking, and I thought you would finish the whole round and come to me, but you.
With a name starting with V, I'm sure you're used to being the last. So I
Yeah,
just
I know
decided
because
to
of my
reverse that for
alphabet,
a
right? The
change.
V, all V's are always at the end.
I decided to reverse the trend for a change.
Yeah, I know. If you felt like a teacher, I feel like a student right now because I'm like, oh my god, she asked me the question first. So I'll need a little bit more time to
Okay,
think.
so Sanid, are you ready to
Uh,
go?
1 second.
Yeah. Hey guys, it wasn't that difficult a question, yeah.
Hey everyone, this is Sanit.
Hi. Mm.
Yeah, so the question was, which historical figure I would like to meet, or do I relate with?
Either what any of the whatever's comes to the top of your mind. Both are
Preferably,
acceptable, yeah.
uh, I would like to meet two people like together, Gandhi and Ambedkar. I think that's the. I would
Wow.
like to know their thoughts right now.
Any
Both of them.
particular questions you would have for Gandhi and Ambedkar?
I would just present the current political climate, and I would like to I would like to listen to their discussion between both of them,
Oh,
because they had a lot of arguments between them, and I would like to know if there is a common ground there, or like,
or at least
uh,
in today's scenario, whether they can find a common ground.
common ground. Yeah, like it would be interesting to see like many things which
Okay.
Ambedkar would say, "I told you so." So it would be nice. It would be a nice thing to I would just step back and listen, because I don't have anything to add to that conversation. Yeah,
Any particular book you're going to talk about today, Sanit?
Really don't want my attention to be divided right now.
I'm just going to listen. I
Why does it have to be today?
yeah, I okay.
Okay.
Rupena,
Rupaya?
can you mute yourself? I think
Yeah, I think she just did.
Yeah, I'm just here to listen today, actually, just to listen from
Okay.
everybody. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Shirisha, Alay, any of you would like to go?
Go ahead, Alai. Tell us.
I was just going to do the same thing, say the same thing to you, but okay. Yeah, I don't know. Indian history, or do you think like any figure in any history?
Any figure in the entire world.
Oh, that would be mostly like Socrates and Plato. It would just be, I mean, it's just talking to them, just like getting to know
I
their
think
ideas. Yeah, that would
You
be.
really don't like yourself, no?
What?
You don't like yourself a lot, no? Of
Yes,
everything that
I
you could
know.
have chosen,
I know.
you've chosen the two people who think way too much.
Yes, I know.
yeah. And I know who will go with Alay on this journey of meeting Socrates and Plato.
Who?
Akhilesh, he's a
Oh,
Socrates fan.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Shirisha?
I don't think I identify with this person, but I would have liked to meet Purnachandra Tejasvi, because I've always really liked the way he's narrated his stories, and I would have probably liked to listen to it firsthand. So I think it's just the storytelling part of it that really has always made me want to meet him.
Lovely. Lovely. That's beautiful. Next. Anyone? Akhilesh?
The tough one. There's a lot of people I'd like to visit and warn about their impending doom, but I'll probably join Ale for a short while, at least till Socrates, and then probably leave because Plato seems to bore a lot of people with all his crazy out of the world theories. So, but yeah, I've really like to, uh, for a change, step into a world of chaos. I'd like to go to the French Revolutionary times during the Louis XVI and see what's happening. You know, visit Robespierre and probably behead him before he starts the terror. And yeah,
That's interesting. That's
Wow.
really taken us back to the, yeah,
yeah.
right? Okay, nice. Kanika, are you ready now?
Yeah, no, so when you ask the question, does it have to be someone who's like from the past, or it can be someone who's current as well?
Someone who's current, who's most likely to make history 10 years down the line will do.
So, I mean, I think I'm just like the one piece of perspective that I feel like I don't get enough of is like Indian female politicians. So, I would want to meet like Sushma Swaraj, maybe, and even from the current set of leaders, like regardless of their political leanings, those are the people that I would choose to
Oh.
meet if I could.
Wow. That's a very different angle. Nice. Yeah. So, Mandar.
Yeah, so there are various people that I would like to meet. I mean, all of the people that all our friends here have named. And for various reasons, I wouldn't want to meet anyone also. But in the context of today's session, I think I would love to go back in time and meet three people. One would be Someshwara III, one of the Chalukya kings. And the second would be a Jain poet known as Chavundaraya II, also in the court of a Chalukya king called Jaisimha II. And the third would be Abul Fazl. And the reason I would want to meet them is because these people showed the way in writing about history from a culinary perspective, and food which had remained in text mainly as a matter of gastronomics, mainly as a matter of moral and medicinal thought in the Hindu traditional thought, right? So these people changed that and gave a culinary perspective. So brought cooking and not just eating and feeding. In their telling of history. So there.
Aditi.
Hey, so I would probably like to join Kanika in her escapade. Basically, that's one thing I was just thinking. I wanted to. Is it okay to take the names who will eventually become a history maybe 10, 15 years down the line? So I would definitely love to meet some of these women leaders specifically on the politics scene, not just in India, at the world stage. And it would be interesting to talk to them, get to know their journey.
Yeah, now Kamala Harris.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what everyone's thinking about right now.
I've been reading about her since morning, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. On that note, Shreya, you could also. Is this the first time you're coming in, Shreya?
Oh no, actually my first was actually the graphic novel session.
Okay, right.
Yes, so this is my second session.
Okay, that's nice. Welcome. So, would you like to go ahead and talk about other than Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I heard a lot of deep answers, but my answer actually, I'm kind of like a little skeptical to like really voice it out right now.
Because go ahead, take a chance.
No, it's not really deep. It's basically like I would like to meet like Modi and Amit Shah and just ask why. What were you thinking? But yeah,
and why not? Deep. Why not?
It's just like deep frustration as to what were you guys thinking. So yeah,
why not? Lovely. Is there a Sanket? Are you online? You'd like to answer this? Sanket?
Sanket says 5 minutes.
Okay. So I think, and my answer, while it's a little similar to Kanika and Aditi in terms of nationality, I'm not talking of a current leader, but I'd like to meet Indira Gandhi. For the simple reason that I think when I was growing up, she was a power to reckon with. Yes. And I have those images of her imprinted in my mind. So, I, of course, so there are certain things I would have loved to know how it was for her life, especially after I read her autobiography. It was a very different image, and newspapers that we saw as kids had a very different image of her. So, I would somewhere like to reconcile Indira, the person, Priyadarshini Indira, with Indira Gandhi, the politician. And yeah, that's where that would be an interesting. Plus, of course, there are so many more, but she comes to the top of my mind. Okay, so anyway, and that sets the note for really. Did I miss anyone else? I think those are the names I could see. Is there anyone else I've missed? No, right? Okay, so if I've missed anyone, guys, please volunteer yourself. If not, let's go ahead and, like I said, to start with, history is really, really vast. And when I was trying to, collate themes or topics for this, there are so many parameters that we can divide history on. One is parameters of time, and we have, right from the prehistoric era to, ancient history, medieval, and then modern, whatever the timeline. So current affairs history, can be classified in terms of timeline. At the same time, in terms of countries and continents. So you have the European history, you have the Asian history, you have the Latin American history, and American, South America, the African history, and there's so much that you can really. Then going a little earlier in time, you have the Roman history, the Greek and the Egyptian history, and each topic, I think, can be taken for a session, and we can have an unending discussion on it. Right? History is linked to mythologies. And then we also have histories in terms of very specific events that have happened in different parts of the world and that have shaped the world history in terms of, the world wars, the First World War, the Second World War, specifically the Holocaust, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, Korean Wars, Vietnam Wars, India, Pakistan, the partition, the entire colonial reign, right? So many things it can be divided into, and then this is just the world history in terms of political and countries. There's also history of every subject that we can talk of. There's the history of medicine, there's the history of literature, like Mandara was saying, there's the history of food and agriculture, there's the history of music, art, history of filmmaking, history of literature per se. So there's so much that can, and there are so many books that talk about each of these aspects, non-fiction, and of course then we also have parallelly, which today is not in our scope today, but we've had sessions on this earlier, that is historical fiction, where the historical event becomes the basis for a story or a fiction in that particular setting. But for today, we will stick to the non-fiction, the actual history as chronicled or as put down by historians or by the people themselves who are a part of this history, who have left an account for us of what has happened, right? And history researchers, philosophers, right? So what we could do is, I really don't want to say give out a particular topic or a theme right now. And I'd like anyone to, whichever book they are with, start with whichever book is on top of their mind. And then from there, we'll work out the themes as it comes up to start with. Is that okay? Right, so we could either start with Indian history or world history or prehistory, whichever book anybody would like to start with, and then we'll take it from there. Does that sound fine? So anyone who would like to go? You guys want me to take names to start? Don't make it such a class.
Yeah, I can go.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go
I don't
ahead.
know if this fits in well into the history, but I just like 3 books I want to talk about today, so I'm just gonna take my time and talk about them.
Go ahead.
So the first book that I want to talk about is, I guess the picture is reversed, but it's called The Great Derangement, and it's written by Amitav Ghosh.
Okay.
So this is a history in a very Indian context, because this is a book about climate change, but it's a history of climate change in a very Asia specific context. Because I mean, I've noticed this, that whenever we do seem to talk about climate change, or wherever we're getting our sources from, they're mostly sort of Eurocentric, or at least Western centric sources, and we're talking about that, or we're talking about the, let's say, the poorest of the parts of the world, which is what is the effect that is being seen in Africa or some other desert places, something like that. But Asia as a whole has also, lost a lot of things, and has had a remarkable history with climate change. So this book sort of talks about that, and it also sort of talks about what is it that is great derangement, like what is this period of great confusion, and why is climate change such an issue. The title is Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable. So the unthinkable part is also sort of important. Amitav Ghosh, we all know him as like the fiction writer. He's written other very popular fiction books. I think one of them was centered around Sundarbans, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
Last Palace. So
Not palace. Yeah.
no, sorry,
I'll
yeah,
tell you. Carry on. Yeah.
Hungry
Yeah.
Tide. That was the one.
Hungry Tide. Right. Yeah. That
Yeah.
was the one.
So he was around Sundarbans, and he has spent his extraordinary time of his life around some Sundarbans, researching, and the whole Bengal area. I think he's from Kolkata, so I think he's quite familiar with that. So he's coining this term, great derangement, which is a period of great confusion, is the context that is putting this in. So I'd like to read an excerpt on basically where the title comes from. So he's sort of putting up his premise in talking about the climate change in this context, and then says, in a substantially altered world, when sea levels rise, when sea level rise has swallowed the Sundarbans and made cities like Kolkata, New York, Bangkok uninhabitable, when readers and museum goers turn to art and literature of our time, will they not look first and most urgently for traces and portents of the altered world of their inheritance? And when they fail to find them, what should they and what can they do other than to conclude that ours was a time when most forms of art and literature were drawn into the modes of concealment that prevented people from recognizing the realities of their plight? Quite possibly, then, this era, which so congratulates itself on its self awareness, will come to be known as the time of the Great Derangement. So, the I think he sort of talks about this in 3 aspects. The first part of which is the story aspect, which is where he sort of argues that why is it that at this point, even at this point, when we're talking about climate change, why is it that the most books that are showing climate change, they're categorized under dystopia or science fiction or fantasy? Why are they not given as much attention as any of the other realism, any other book? And why do so many of our stories sort of shy away from talking about it when it's so immediately going to affect us? And the second part of it is he's talking about, he's giving a context of Asia in this whole world story of climate change. And the third part is politics, which I'm sort of still reading. But I also want to talk a little bit about the Asia part. Just give me a second. I'm just going to find it. Yeah. So he also argues that more than I mean, it seems like a very collective issue, and it is, of course, to an extent it is. But climate change is not going to be like reverse flooding and just complete destruction all around. It is going to be like that to probably certain extent, but more than all of that, it's going to be mass evacuations. It's going to be people leaving their properties and places and moving to other parts of the world that are relatively safer. And it's going to be, sort of coping with extreme lack of resources. So it's going to be about those things, which are, to be honest, things that a lot of people have faced before. Societies have risen up and have gone extinct. There are sort of villages and communities that have thrived and then become obsolete. And that's essentially what happens. So he talks about, he sort of relates this global phenomenon with very personal stories. One of this is, I said, I learned from a World Bank report that Kolkata is one of the global megacities that is most at risk from climate change. Equally shocking was the discovery that my family's house, where my mother and sister live, is right next to one of the city's most threatened neighborhoods. The report forced me to face a question that eventually confronts everybody who takes the trouble to inform themselves about climate change. What can I do to protect my family and loved ones now that I know what lies ahead? My mother is elderly and increasingly frail. There is no telling how she would fare if the house were to be cut off by flood, medical attention were to become unavailable for any length of time. After much thought, I decided to talk to my mother about moving. I tried to introduce the subject tactfully, but it made little difference. She looked at me as though I had lost my mind. Nor could I blame her. It did seem like lunacy to talk about leaving a beloved family home with all its memories and associations simply because of a threat outlined in a World Bank report. It was a fine day, cool and sunlit, and I dropped the subject. It sort of goes on and he talks about this thing, but it's just sort of with these stories, and then of course with numbers and statistics, he also brings all of it together and puts some really much needed, I would say, context to this whole story and the whole narrative. I think it's a great place if you want to educate on anyone, ourselves or anyone else, on sort of climate change in general, but also in a context that we can relate with. Sorry, it was like a very grim opening to.
Right. No, that's the reality, right? So that reminds me of a book I read. I'm not carrying it with me today, but it is called The Last Child in the Woods. And parallelly, it talks about how the outdoors, because of loss of nature in the urban areas, children also are less and less exposed to nature, which kind of makes the younger generation that's growing up immune to, immune as in it's a very farcical immunity. I mean, they don't have that touch with nature, right? So they don't know what's happening because of that. Like, I mean, that's a different topic altogether. But yeah, this what I'm talking of just.
It is no, but you're right. It is sort of a detachment that it's not something that affects us right away.
Right,
Which is
right.
what
It's only a place
coach
to
argues.
holiday. Yeah.
Yeah, that we sort of very conveniently hide the stories. I think this book was written about 4-5 years ago. I think situation has become much better from that point. I think, but it still needs to improve a lot. So we very conveniently seem to ignore these stories.
Right.
Yeah.
So in a way, yeah, this is, if you put it in a historical context, the history of the geography. Right. It's the geographical history of any country
It
or
is
the
history of
world.
the
Yeah, right,
phenomenon.
right. And like you said, if you go back to the books that go into prehistory and ancient history, there's so much of places where the climate and the geography has influenced the population and the history that you're talking about. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So anyone else on a similar theme would have any book to yeah? Any other, or you want to go ahead with your next book, Alec?
No. Please,
Or you'll come
we'll
back
do a
to it
round and
later.
I'll come
Okay.
back. Yeah.
Okay. So having spoken of climate and having said the climate context, maybe it would make sense to go back to prehistory or ancient history. And I know a lot of us have been reading about that. So anyone would want to talk about any of the books pertaining to ancient history. Sanket, you've been talking about what's that? the early Indians. Would you like to begin with that? Yeah, we'll start with that, and I'm sure because I think quite a few of us have been reading that one, the early Indians.
Oh, we can't hear Sanket.
Can you hear me now? All right. Okay. So my interest in history is that the older it is, the more fascinated I am by it. So as a corollary, current affairs is something that I'm hardly interested in. I find it predictable and boring. Right. I mean, like I understand that uh, can happen, within the current context and so on. But so so the older the history, and especially prehistory, is something that I find fascinating. Right? So like what you were saying, just the fact that the climate changes dictate migration patterns. For instance, right. So the like the ice ages, and then the ages, and that time when there is so during the ice age especially, it's a very arid climate, and so on. And when we talk about prehistory, and then when we talk about history and the contemporary thing, that the timelines are very, very different. Right. So when you talk about prehistory, it's thousands of years, right? And then there are no specific personalities that are making these decisions or changing the yeah, right. And then there is that sense of that the time, the drawn out timelines, and this anonymity of the people, that is sort of makes it, in a sense, a very different way of approaching history. And then there's very little by its definition, prehistory would mean there is very little documented evidence. Right? So what you need to go with is somewhat of archaeology, and there's later on, when people started, when writing came about, there's somewhat of linguistic evidence that comes to the fore. But what has changed, something that has changed drastically over the last about a decade, but more so, in fact, in the last few years, is there's a lot of work done in genetics, and that has not taken forefront. Right? So previously, it was primarily archaeology that sort of, see, and then we have this, like, so archaeology is a very different discipline, and compared to history, and given that especially on the prehistory front, given that we had primarily archaeological evidence, it's almost sort of archaeology used to dictate, history and historical narratives and so on. Now, but with genetics coming in, the game has changed a lot. So now, especially there's a lot of work done across different labs, but a couple of major works. One, team led by, I don't know whether I'll get the pronunciation right, but it's Svante Pabo, in Zurich. And then another is David Reich, in Harvard, right? So, and in fact, David Wright has this book called, I can have that book with me here. It's called Who We Are and Where We Came From. So it's a book published in 2018. So it's a fascinating account, right? It's basically talks about how this technique that has come into the forefront right now over the last few years is called ancient DNA sequencing. So I mean, like, the DNA sequencing itself was a extremely expensive process, which is like now almost a more than 1,000 or 10,000 fold reduction in the cost and so on. And it is, all of us can get our DNAs sequences, companies like 23andMe and so on. Now, what is the interesting now is we can now geneticists can now use fossil records, fossil specimens from humans, or it need not even be our the Homo sapiens species, any of the Homo species. You can basically take the fossil specimens and extract DNA out of it and sequence it. So that's I mean, and when I was reading it, it's a uh, it takes a huge amount of work, great skill. It's a lot of hard work to be able to do that, because I mean, like, these are fossil records that have been there for tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago, and most of the DNA that you would find there is a bacterial DNA. So to sort of remove all of that and extract what's the relevant DNA, so that itself is takes a lot of effort. But what that has sort of started making it clear is that the path of human migration, right? So there's always this theory about there are strong proponents about this out of Africa theory, that humans started out of Africa, and then there's a single branch just spread out in the entire world, and so on. There's a lot of archaeological and evidence and so on. There's and some amount of DNA evidence from the contemporary humans, and there are also theories around. No, that's not necessarily the case. Maybe humans evolved, in different places, and uh, in parallel, and that's probably how it is. But now it is quite clear, with this ancient DNA sequencing, is that there is one major migration that happened out of Africa, and that is, and we are all basically, basically part of that long chain, right? So, and this happened around, depending on, like, this is probably 50 to 70,000 years ago, right? And now we also sort of know the route they took, which is basically from the Horn of Africa, what is called the southern route, and they came into Yemen, what is the present day Yemen, and then there was a lot of migrations in different places. So and this book, Who We Are and Where We come from, talks a lot about all of this, and the different migrations that happened, how the world was populated, and then how the number of population replacements that happened, right? So Europe, basically, there have been at least two, major complete, almost near complete replacements in populations. There's also a lot of evidence around the long conflict, as well as interbreeding between the modern humans and Neanderthals, right? And we have also been discovering some new species of humans. I mean, again, there's a little bit of a dispute whether to call them as species, or just different types of humans, and so on. So there are fossil records that were found in a cave called Denisova in somewhere in Siberia. So other than Homo sapiens, we knew about Neanderthals, but now we know about another group called Denisovans, right? And of course, there is like 30 years ago in India, we found somewhere in Madhya Pradesh, we found in the Narmada Valley, we found another kind of human fossil, and as yet that is unclassified. It's just called as the Narmada human. That's all it is called, because, and there is in fact a very nice article I was reading about the loneliness of the Narmada human, because we haven't found anything. So all of this is very, very fascinating, and then how this genetic evidence is getting connected with archaeological evidence, and then later on linguistic evidence as well. So we know the pattern of human movement, right? And then we sort of also sort of can put some date of like our sort of ancestors, in terms of like who gave us sort of the mitochondrial DNA, and then the Y chromosome DNA, and that date can be sort of put to be around 130,000 years ago, right? So there's this concept of the mitochondrial Eve, in the sense that, so that that woman was the they are sort of descendants. It's a very simplistic notion. It's not exactly that way, because we are made of thousands of our ancestors basically. But that's basically what it is. So this particular book has a lot more details around all of this. It's a fascinating read. Just to sort of complete this thread, then there's another book which came around the same time, by Tony Joseph. Tony Joseph is a journalist, and he wrote this book called Early Indians, which is sort of like inspired, or borrows quite a bit from this David Wright's work. In fact, every few pages there's a mention of that particular and it's just something. I mean, even if you don't read the first book as time, but I think this is something I would highly recommend. In fact, we had a lot of discussion on this book in the group as well. It's a very, very readable book. And so basically what Tony Joseph does here is he basically sort of summarizes all these findings around the recent genetic evidence to this ancient DNA sequencing, the archaeological evidence that has always been there, the linguistic evidence which is even older, right? So it sort of connects and sort of talks about the different migrations that happened, in India, right? So like the first one was probably the sort of Africa migrants who came in around 60,000 years ago, probably, right? And then the second major migration is from a bunch of farmers from the Zagros region in Iran, and they sort of mixed with the first Indians here who came from Africa, and together it's all the evidence points to that they were the Harappans basically. They formed the Harappan civilization. Just before that, I mean, it was, or there's also some, and before that they also settled in a place called Mehrgarh, which is in Balochistan, and then towards the end of that, the Harappan civilization, and the Harappan civilization is like, I mean we all have only studied it, but if you read this this book, and there's a lot of other information, it's amazing what achievements were done, and just the mere expanse of that is, it occupied about the expanse was about a third of what the present day India is. It was so big, right? And um, and of course, so that was the Harappan, and there is a lot of evidence that uh, the Indus script or the Harappan script is not yet deciphered. That is the biggest sort of bottleneck in some of these things. But there's a lot of, again, studies and some speculation, some studies to show that it was probably a Dravidian, belong to the proto Dravidian family, and there's also connection that shows. So there's with the language, it's an ancient language called Elamite, which was spoken around the Mesopotamian region. So there's that old connection as well. Uh, uh, then of course, there are some migrations from which brought in this what are called as the Astro-Asiatic languages. Some of which are spoken in the tribal regions. There's also there's another was the Tibeto-Burman languages. There's migration. But the last and the fourth major migration, and which is the most controversial, is the well, I mean, I would basically, and then it's basically called as the migration of the steppe pastoralis, basically sheep rearers, the pastoralis, who came in from around the Kazakhstan and those regions. Those are the, I'm going to put that term Aryan in quotes, right? So that's sort of that, and they brought in an early form of Indo-Aryan languages, and maybe even a rudimentary form of Sanskrit, or probably Sanskrit formed here. they mixed with the Harappans here, and then by then the Harappans were also, the whole Harappan civilization was declining, primarily due to long-lasting droughts, right? And then and Harappans started moving towards the west and south, essentially. That sort of happened, and these new migrants, they moved again further north and west and so on. So which sort of today, if you look at the basis of our, there are two major population groups. This is called as the ANI and ASI. ASI is the ancestral South Indians, which is essentially the first Indians plus the Zagros farmers, which basically is the Harappan, and then of course there's a little bit of the steppe pastoralists or the Aryans, and in the ANI is the Harappans plus the steppe pastoralists, and then there's a lot more genetic heritage of the later migrants in the ANI population compared to the ASI population, and so this book chronicles all of that and then ties it into other kind of evidence. So yeah, I guess I've spoken quite a bit. But I'll leave it at that, and then we can maybe revisit.
Thank you, Sanket. Anyone else has read this book here, the Early Indians? Anybody else on the current group right now has read this book? Would like to add something to it? Or maybe some other book of same time, same theme that anybody would like to go with? Ancient Indians, Harappan civilization, migrations.
So there is a comment on the YouTube feed by Mad Max 1. Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari explains a lot of things like religion, myths, etc. from a historic perspective. So just want to say thanks for that comment. And if anyone would like to talk about that book, Anupa.
Right, Sapiens. Yeah, that's another.
From a historic perspective.
Yeah. I think a lot of as I've read Sapiens. Sapiens is, yeah, Adi, I was about to say that. Yeah, Adi, you want to go ahead with Sapiens, and maybe I'll join in as you're talking.
Hey, for some strange reason, I don't remember. I mean, I know I've read it recently, as recently as 2 years back, but I don't remember much of a detail. But what I liked about the book is, for somebody to cover it, it's not history. It's like essentially it talks about how we humans evolved, and we have always read it in a very scientific context, right? Like, this is how the evolution took place, this is what happened. But to start linking every cultural, social aspect of us humans as a as a whole species, I think that was an interesting way of putting it out there. That was an interesting way of sort of looking at this topic and writing it. So I found it fairly a good read. I mean, I won't call it was very, if you have to be much more, if you have to substantiate the whole piece and much more technically correct, then probably Sapiens is not that book, but it definitely gives you that perspective. And I think the feeling which I know I'm talking very, very superficial, but yeah, that's the, I just remember what I felt after reading it is like, this is something everybody should read, because it gives you that feeling, hey, we all belong to that one humans as a species. I know it sounds very cliche, but like, once you read it, you realize, hey, we all come from the same place. I mean, come on, like that is the one thing we should all must remember. So I think that was the feeling I got from reading the book. And that's, I mean, I would love to definitely visit, reread it, because I never, like I said, I didn't get into the detailing of it, or if he has mentioned something, go out and explore about it, or which scientific paper is he referring to, what theories, etc. I actually honestly didn't get into that. I just like flipped through the book, and that's the feeling I got.
So Matrix 1 makes a very succinct point. Summary: humans have prospered because of their ability to tell stories.
Wow.
I think that's a great way of putting
it. That's true. That's very true. Storytelling is an inherent trait which has helped us survive and prosper. Right? Anyone else here has read Sapiens?
I think
and would like
Vaidehi
to say
said,
something about it.
Vaidehi said that she's read this.
Yeah, Vaidehi. Anyone else wants to talk about Sapiens?
Yeah, I mean this thing only. Oh, our internet's acting up. This whole central thesis that it's all stories that we tell each other, and that's what we. And he just takes that example and just he just takes it the premise as an example in a bunch of places, like in money, which is a story that we tell each other that okay, this piece of paper has value, and that's how because we all believe in it, we are able to build upon it and sort of use it in a more constructive way. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper. And same way, organizations. He uses the term called legal fiction. That these are all like, what is it, like Google, Facebook, and all these organizations. They're all legal fictions. It's like Google doesn't exist. There's no such thing as Google. It's all, if you go to the building of Google, it's a building, and there are chairs, and there are people on it, and there are laptops, so there are devices assembled on it. But there is no such thing as Google. It's a legal fiction that exists in all of our minds. So he also said that ability to tell our stories, and also ability to, I think, share our stories, like sort of communicate our vision through stories. I think which is why reading that, it's just like Adi mentioned, it just sort of sends you in this spiral of thinking about all of these things.
There's
I
one,
think, yeah.
Great read.
There's one interesting, so the early chapter which talks about agriculture, like how agriculture started, right? And the name of the chapter is very interesting. He writes, I can't remember the exact term, but agriculture, that's the biggest mistake of humankind. And
He uses the term fraud. It's the biggest fraud.
It's biggest, something on that line. And then he goes on talking about it, that probably a lot of problems we face today, if you go back and like in a very, very, what do you call it, like in a very, very pessimistic thought, is that, hey, if we would have not resorted to agriculture and just stayed as tribes, probably would have been a better life. You don't know. Like it's a very casual remark he makes that. So that was a nice
In what I liked about Sapiens, and like Adi says, of course, it's a huge book, so I don't remember the detailed thing, but I think he makes history very approachable. So I think, Adi, you recommended that book to me, and one of the things you spoke about that time when you recommended the book to me is that this should be a textbook in school, right, in high school. So I think from that point of view, it makes history readable, because otherwise, I think for a lot of us, if we go back to school days, I don't know how many of us really enjoyed studying history right from school, because I do hear a lot of people, even who later on talk a lot about history or do their, research in history, and they say that, I never enjoyed history in school because it was a dry subject until I either met somebody or read something or I visited some place, right? So in that sense, what Sapiens does is makes it very, very approachable and makes it user-friendly, for a term that's, it kind of allows you to, read about a lot of things in a story format, right? Without getting in fiction. He's not really bringing in fiction, or he's not, telling stories in terms of creating protagonists and villains, but he's telling the story of our existence, and in a way that all of us understand and like to believe. I mean, he makes it very believable. He rationalizes a lot of stuff, right, which appeals to the intellect. And I think that's what's striking about that particular book. Though I'm not so sure about Yuval Harari in other books, and I haven't read any of his other books. So, yeah. So that's about Sapiens. Anyone else wants to add anything about Sapiens here? So moving on from prehistory, any other book before we move on from prehistory? Anyone would, yeah. So coming to, let's say, I know a lot of us are waiting to talk about Indian history, but before we go to Indian history, there's a lot of other French history, Greek history, very interesting topics, which because I haven't read anything much on these, and I'd really like if anyone has books on that to, be shared before we move on to Indian history, because I know quite a few of us have read books on Indian history, but anything on, especially the French history, does anyone have anything interesting to share about? Or Akhilesh, any book you'd like to share?
So I haven't read many chronicles about French history as such, but typically when you talk about French Revolution, that's probably the most covered topic around French history. When I talk about French Revolution, I mean the first revolution of the 1789s. There are obviously multiple revolutions after that, but a lot of people have wrote it, uh, talked about it, and there has always been, it's very controversial topic because uh, especially during the 18th or the 17th century, when people have written it, depending on their political affiliations and their, whether you're working from this side of the channel or the other side of the channel, there has always have been conflicting views about uh, revolution as such, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Recently, I got started. I haven't read it, but I started reading about. There's a book called "The Ancien Regime and the Revolution" by Alexis de Tocqueville.
Can you show the cover?
It's called.
Tremblay.
No, Tremblay-Saron's is the French name. It's called the
Okay.
Ancien Regime and the.
Okay.
So it's
Revolution.
probably one of the very definitive view of the revolution, starting from what were the opinions that started with the revolution, which is talking about the ancient regime, and he starts from Louis the 14th and probably ends up till Louis the 16th, and what eventually sprang into the revolutions. So this is probably one of the definitive books. If you wanted.
Who's the author of this?
It's called. He's Alexis de Tocqueville. He was a Frenchman. He was a French aristocrat and liberal politician. He worked with the French Second Republic, and he was probably the minister during the Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon III rule. So he was there. Apparently, he wanted to write more about this, but in 1859 he died because of tuberculosis, so he couldn't write more about the revolution. He's also written one more book that's called The Democracies in America, which is a very good insight on the democratic revolutions that were happening in America during almost at the same time. I think they were happening at the same time, both the French Revolution and the American Revolution of Independences. So I'll also type the name in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ancien Regime, I think Sunny does type. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a very, I'd say it's a very laborious read as well, because it's a lot of details, and he's tried to cover from I'm telling you, from the aristocracy, from the feudal structure in the French society, all the way till how it all culminated into the bloody revolution that was during the 1780s. But he is someone who's an inside man, so he worked. So I think his parents were there when the terror was happening under Robespierre and the internal committee, and he worked with the government as well. So he's probably an inside man to write about a lot of things. But yeah, I find it very definitive, and it's like if you wanted to read one book which covers almost all the topics that you want to read about French Revolution, yeah, this is probably the one that I'd say.
Okay. That's interesting. Right. Any other book you'd like to share?
Any other book? We talked about Greek history. I think you touched upon Greek history. So the most famous one on the Greek history is obviously when I talk about Greek history, I'm referring to the ancient one, not the modern one. So ancient history, I think we all go back to the histories of Herodotus. Herodotus of Halicarnassus is probably the most
ancient history recorded.
The most revered historian of ancient history. Is probably called the father of modern
Father of
history.
history.
First historian, right?
He's
He was
supposed to be the
probably
foremost
he's
historian, the first
supposed to
person
be
to
the first.
have started chronicling history.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. He's. I think he's more of a journalist than a historian because apparently he traveled a lot and interviewed a lot of people, and all his accounts are mostly come from talking to people and writing it down. So a lot of our modern tales and famous stories, like the Battle of which one is that? The Battle of 300, Halicarnassus. The Battle of Thermopylae, the 300 battle, the famous one. It's also written by if one of the books from Herodotus. He has written 9 books separately. So there are the histories are is a combination of 9 books, all of them named after some muse that he is. Um, I don't know what was the inspiration for that, but all of them are named after one muse. And he talks a lot about things, and I think one of the books covers Egypt, and that's one of the first accounts that we get of the pyramid of Egypt that had existed during the time of Herodotus. So that's probably the one of the earliest account of him seeing the ancient pyramids of Giza, and that's probably the oldest account of what. So that's how we know that they have been there even before the time of Herodotus, and then that's one of the definitive accounts. A lot of his stories tend to be stories and not histories, I'd say, because they tend to shuffle between reality and mythology and reality and storytelling. There's a lot of gods and a lot of typical Greek stuff happening. So yeah, I think he's one of the very famous ones, and yeah, it can be a very difficult to read thing also because it's Greek and it's translated and depends on how good the translations are. Apparently, that's not something uh, that has been done properly. It's at the same level as when you say Homer's Aeneid, or not. No, that's Homer's, not Aeneid. Odyssey. Some translations are good, some translations are not so good. So it's the same with.
Right, getting the right translation is always.
Yeah, I wish I could read ancient Greek, but yeah, I can't. But, I have
Right.
not read the whole Herodotus history because apparently it's a very big thing to read. But I think most of us have come across different stories from it at certain times because people have used those stories and into their own tales, and we had movies, we had TV series come out of that. So yeah, I think he's probably the oldest historian that we've talked about today.
Herodotus, right? Yeah, I know. So yeah, I mean, I did come across this that he's called the father of his. I mean, the first historian ever. But I wasn't sure about the specific books or because again, I think like you said, because it's writings which have come down the centuries, you know,
Yes.
they do get modified along the way, and then there are authors who write about these rather than directly from the. So what we read is a lot of times the commentaries by other authors, right? Not the original text, which would be possibly quite difficult. Right? It's the same like I think a lot of us read about even the other ancient texts like the Vedas or where you read the commentaries written by the people who've studied it, right? Not the original stuff. Yeah, so that's interesting.
Yeah,
Anyone
I
else?
had a quick
Yeah.
question for Akhilesh. So
Yes.
you said right
Right.
these books are laborious reads. So I just wanted to know, just quickly wanted to know how are you like, is there a process of reading them? Are you like taking notes while doing a research when you are reading?
So that's what I've not read all of them, but you try to take it. I think tale by tale. I think it's probably a better read if you try to read it like sort of compartmentalize it into what are
break
the
it into
stories.
break it into pieces and
Yeah, it's always an easy way to read that, but then it depends on the translation. Some translations I didn't find it very helpful. Of course, I've not bought the books; I've read it online mostly.
okay.
So I did find that all the translations are not very helpful sometimes, but some of the translators are very good and they've actually done a good job with the translation. So it also depends on whether you find a good translation or not. I'm not getting. Hopefully, I can get some names, but I'm not getting good name because there are a lot of these books out there. I haven't bought the book. I think I would have read some chapters of it. That's how I remembered it. Yeah, that's the thing with most of the philosophy, ancient Greek and Roman philosophy
I
books. I
mean,
think
lot of history books which have details do become laborious in that context.
in that
Right,
context, yeah.
like one of the books that which is the Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. Again, it's a very nice book. It covers the history right from first century to the current context, say about a decade or two ago. Okay, and I think this book came out somewhere in 2012, or I'm not sure, but somewhere, yeah, in the right in the 21st century. I mean, yeah, in the 21st century, and so it almost covers 20 centuries of history across the world. Okay, so while the name Silk Roads becomes a bit misleading in terms of, the moment you read Silk Roads, the first thing that comes to your mind is the Silk Route, which we talk of from China via Asia into Europe, right, where silk seems to have been traded for many centuries. And while that also makes for a part of this book, what he does in this is he talks of a lot of events which were happening in the eastern side of the world, in the western side of the world parallelly, and how though travel was not very easy, how things did travel even at that point of time. How ideas traveled, how goods traveled, how does the concept of the Silk Route started. And in fact, it's quite interesting. Every chapter in this book has the name of some kind of route. So he says the road of faith, the road of Christian East, the road to revolution, road of the slave road, the road to heaven, which talks of the Jerusalem conquest in the first century, the initial conquest of Jerusalem. Then the road to hell, where he talks of the formation of the Han dynasty and then the invasion by the Mongols also, right? And then he talks of the road of gold, where he enters into the African continent. And and he goes on to America's. So at parallelly, he's covering in the same chapter. He's talking about histories of the West, histories of Central Asia, and histories of East Asia, and he's finding a common ground between all these histories constantly. Right. So in that sense, the book becomes very, very heavy in terms of data. It's an extremely detailed research that he has put in with a lot of names, a lot of places, and a lot of dates. And Sanit, to answer your question, how this could be read, I think I would never be able to read this at one go. This was a book I had to break over a period of time and come back and forth while reading a few smaller books in between, because this tends to be very, very content heavy. And at least personally for me, with my kind of memory, I'm never able to remember everything that I read in this book in terms of names of people and names of places and the dates. But yes, it's a very nice book which kind of gives you a glimpse into entire world history, covering all the major events that have happened across the